The day of my vacation had finally arrived. I was at the airport, holding my boarding pass and passport tightly in my hands. The excitement of traveling to Barcelona, Spain, was overwhelming. It was my first time visiting the city, and I couldn't wait to explore its vibrant streets, stunning architecture, and beautiful beaches. The airport was buzzing with energy. Travelers hurried past me, pulling suitcases and chatting excitedly. Announcements about flights echoed through the large halls, blending with the sound of rolling luggage and footsteps. I looked up at the departure board and saw my flight listed. Flight 204 to Barcelona, boarding gate 12. I made my way through the security checkpoint, placing my bag on the conveyor belt and walking through the scanner. Everything went smoothly, and I breathed a sigh of relief. With plenty of time before boarding, I decided to grab a coffee and relax in the waiting area. Sitting by the large glass windows, I could see planes taking off and landing. The sight made me even more eager to get on my flight. I opened my travel notebook and reviewed my plans for Barcelona. Visiting the Sagrada Familia, walking through Park Güell, exploring the Gothic Quarter, and enjoying tapas at local restaurants were all on my list. A voice over the speakers announced, "Flight 204 to Barcelona is now boarding at gate 12. My heart raced with excitement as I quickly gathered my belongings and headed toward the gate. At the gate, I handed my boarding pass to the attendant, who smiled and said, "Have a great trip." I smiled back and thanked her as I walked down the jet bridge and onto the plane. Inside the plane, I found my seat by the window. I loved sitting by the window because it gave me a chance to watch the clouds and the view below during the flight. As I settled into my seat, the flight attendants made their final announcements and the plane began to taxi toward the runway. When the plane took off, I felt a mix of excitement and wonder. The view from the window was breathtaking. The city below grew smaller and smaller as we climbed higher into the sky. Soon, all I could see were fluffy white clouds and the endless blue sky. During the flight, I thought about everything I wanted to do in Barcelona. I imagined walking along La Rambla, listening to street musicians, and trying authentic paella for the first time. I also looked forward to visiting the beach and feeling the warm sand between my toes. After a few hours, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Barcelona. Please fasten your seatbelts." My excitement grew as the plane started to descend. The city of Barcelona came into view through the window, a stunning blend of urban beauty and natural landscapes. As we landed, I couldn't help but smile. I was finally here, ready to start my adventure in Barcelona. Little did I know, this trip would be filled with unforgettable memories and incredible experiences. As soon as the plane landed, I felt a rush of excitement. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, everyone began gathering their bags from the overhead compartments. I waited patiently, watching people chat about their plans for Barcelona. Finally, it was my turn. I grabbed my backpack and followed the crowd toward the exit. Walking out of the plane, I felt the warm Spanish air for the first time. The airport was modern and lively, filled with travelers from all over the world. Signs in Spanish, Catalan, and English guided me through the arrivals area. I followed the arrows leading to baggage claim, where I waited for my suitcase. It didn't take long before I spotted it, a bright blue suitcase I had packed so carefully the night before. After picking up my bag, I headed toward the customs area. The officer glanced at my passport, smiled, and said, "Welcome to Barcelona." I smiled back, nodded, and continued walking. Just hearing those words made everything feel real. I was finally here. The next step was finding my way to the city. I had already planned to take the Aerobus, a shuttle that connects the airport to the city center. As I walked out of the terminal, the sunshine greeted me, and the air smelled fresh and warm. I quickly spotted the bus station, where the bright blue Aerobus was waiting. I bought a ticket and climbed aboard. Sitting by the window, I placed my suitcase next to me and looked out at the view as the bus began to move. The landscape outside shifted from open spaces to bustling city streets. Barcelona's energy was immediately captivating. As the bus entered the city, I could see the famous wide streets lined with trees and beautiful buildings with balconies. People walked in groups, chatting, laughing, and carrying bags. It was lively but not overwhelming, a perfect balance of activity and charm. The bus made a stop at Plaza de Catalunya, one of the city's main squares and my destination. I got off and looked around, soaking in the sights and sounds. The square was large and open, surrounded by elegant buildings. In the center was a fountain, and nearby pigeons flocked as children tried to chase them. I paused for a moment, taking it all in. This was exactly what I had imagined. A vibrant city filled with life and character. I pulled out the map I had printed earlier and checked my next step, finding my accommodation. I had booked a small apartment near La Rambla, just a short walk from Plaza de Catalunya. Rolling my suitcase behind me, I made my way through the narrow streets. Shops, cafes, and street performers lined the path. The sound of a violin caught my attention, and I stopped briefly to watch a musician playing a soft melody. Finally, I reached the apartment building. It was charming, with wrought iron balconies and colorful flower pots hanging from the windows. I checked in, received the keys, and headed up to my room. The apartment was small but cozy, exactly as I had imagined. There was a comfortable bed, a tiny kitchen, and a balcony overlooking the busy street below. Setting my bags down, I stepped onto the balcony and leaned over the railing. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the city. I couldn't help but smile. This was only the beginning of my adventure in Barcelona, and I knew it was going to be unforgettable. Tomorrow, the real exploration would begin. The next morning, I woke up early, energized by the thought of exploring Barcelona. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and the city below was already alive with activity. I quickly got ready, grabbed my small backpack, and stepped out into the streets. My first destination was La Rambla, the famous tree-lined street that stretched through the heart of the city. As I walked, I noticed how vibrant the streets were. Shops and cafes were opening their doors, and locals were chatting over coffee at small tables outside. The scent of fresh bread and pastries filled the air, tempting me to stop for breakfast. I found a small bakery with a display of golden croissants and colorful macarons in the window. "Buenos dias," the baker greeted me warmly as I entered. "Buenos dias," I replied, trying out my Spanish. "Can I have a croissant and a coffee, please?" He nodded and prepared my order. I paid, thanked him, and took my food to a nearby bench. The croissant was buttery and flaky, and the coffee was strong, giving me the energy I needed to start the day. With breakfast finished, I continued toward La Rambla. The moment I stepped onto the street, I was amazed. It was even more lively than I had imagined. Tall trees shaded the wide pedestrian walkway, which was filled with people, tourists taking photos, locals walking their dogs, and street performers entertaining the crowds. One performer stood out. He was dressed as a statue, painted entirely in silver from head to toe. He stood perfectly still, and I almost believed he was made of metal until a child dropped a coin into his tin. Suddenly, he came to life, striking a pose and making the crowd laugh. I couldn't resist taking a photo. It was such a unique moment, and I knew it would be a memory I'd treasure. As I walked further, I passed stalls selling souvenirs, postcards, magnets, handmade jewelry, and art. I stopped at one stall where a young woman was painting watercolors of Barcelona's landmarks. Her work was beautiful, and I decided to buy a small painting of the Sagrada Familia as a keepsake. "Thank you," I said as she wrapped the painting for me. "You're welcome," she replied with a smile. "Enjoy your time in Barcelona." Further along La Rambla, I came across the Mercat de Sant Josep de la Boqueria, a famous food market. The entrance was colorful and inviting, with a stained glass sign above it. I stepped inside, and my senses were immediately overwhelmed in the best way. The market was filled with vibrant displays of fruits, vegetables, meats, seafood, and sweets. The air was filled with a mix of smells: fresh oranges, grilled meats, and spices. I walked from stall to stall, marveling at the variety. At one stall, I bought a cup of freshly squeezed orange juice. The vendor handed it to me with a smile. "It's the best juice you'll find in Barcelona," he said proudly. He wasn't wrong. The juice was sweet, refreshing, and exactly what I needed after walking so much. After leaving the market, I continued down La Rambla until I reached the Christopher Columbus monument at the end of the street. The towering statue pointed out toward the sea, and the view of the port was stunning. Boats bobbed gently in the water, and the salty sea breeze was refreshing. I sat on a nearby bench for a moment, taking it all in. La Rambla had been an unforgettable experience, full of energy, sights, and sounds. But this was just the start of my day. I still had so much more of Barcelona. After my walk down La Rambla, I decided to explore the Gothic Quarter, one of the oldest and most historic areas of Barcelona. The streets there were narrow and winding, like a maze full of surprises. I pulled out my map to make sure I wouldn't get lost, but part of me was excited to simply wander and see where the streets would lead me. As I stepped into the Gothic Quarter, the atmosphere changed. The noise of La Rambla faded behind me, replaced by the quiet charm of cobblestone streets and centuries-old buildings. The stone walls of the buildings were tall, their balconies decorated with colorful flower pots. Sunlight filtered through the narrow streets, creating patterns on the ground. The first place I came across was a small square called Plaça Sant Felip Neri. It was peaceful, with a fountain in the center and trees providing shade. The walls of the square had visible marks from the past, telling stories of Barcelona's history. A group of children played near the fountain, their laughter echoing softly. I sat on a bench for a moment, enjoying the calmness of the place. From there, I continued my walk and soon found myself in front of the Barcelona Cathedral. Its Gothic architecture was breathtaking, with tall spires and intricate carvings. I stood for a while, admiring the details and the effort that must have gone into building such a magnificent structure. I decided to step inside the cathedral, curious to see what it looked like. The air inside was cool, and the light streaming through the stained glass windows created a magical effect. People walked quietly, some taking photos, others sitting in the pews in reflection. I spent a few minutes walking around, taking in the beauty of the architecture and the sense of history. As I left the cathedral, I noticed a group of musicians setting up in the square outside. They were preparing to perform, and a small crowd had already gathered. I decided to stay and watch. The music was lively, with guitars, violins, and hand drums filling the air. The crowd clapped along, and a few people even started to dance. The energy of the performance was infectious, and I found myself smiling and tapping my foot to the rhythm. When the song ended, the musicians bowed, and the crowd cheered loudly. I dropped a few coins into their hat as a small gesture of appreciation. Feeling inspired by the music, I wandered further into the Gothic quarter. I passed by small shops selling handmade crafts, vintage books, and local artwork. One shop caught my attention. It had a display of beautifully crafted leather journals in the window. I stepped inside and was greeted by the shopkeeper, an older man with a friendly smile. "Welcome," he said. "Are you looking for something special?" "I'm just browsing," I replied, running my fingers over the smooth leather covers of the journals. He nodded. "These journals are made locally, perfect for capturing your memories." I decided to buy one, thinking it would be the perfect way to document my trip. As the shopkeeper wrapped it for me, he said, "Enjoy your time in Barcelona. It's a city full of stories." Leaving the shop, I felt a deep appreciation for the Gothic quarter. Every corner seemed to hold something unique, whether it was a quiet square, a beautiful building, or a friendly shopkeeper. By now, the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, and the streets were bathed in a golden light. I decided to head back toward my apartment to rest for a while. The day had been full of discoveries, and I couldn't wait to see what the next day in Barcelona would bring. After resting for a while at my apartment, I decided to spend the evening at Barceloneta Beach, one of Barcelona's most famous seaside spots. The idea of watching the sunset by the sea, feeling the cool breeze, and hearing the gentle waves sounded like the perfect way to end the day. As I stepped out of my apartment, the streets were already glowing with the warm hues of twilight. I made my way toward the beach, passing lively cafes and restaurants along the way. The aroma of grilled seafood and paella filled the air, tempting me to stop for a quick snack. But I was too excited to reach the shore, so I decided to save dinner for later. When I arrived at Barceloneta Beach, the view was breathtaking. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple as the sun slowly dipped toward the horizon. The beach was alive with energy. People walking along the shoreline, families building sandcastles, and friends playing volleyball. The sound of laughter mixed with the rhythmic crash of the waves. I took off my shoes and stepped onto the soft sand. The cool grains felt comforting under my feet as I walked closer to the water. Small waves rolled onto the shore, leaving behind tiny seashells glistening in the fading sunlight. Finding a quiet spot, I sat down and let myself relax. The breeze carried the salty scent of the ocean, and the sound of the waves was calming. I pulled out the leather journal I had bought earlier in the Gothic quarter. Opening it to the first page, I began to write about everything I had experienced that day. The lively streets of La Rambla, the peaceful squares of the Gothic quarter, and now the beauty of the beach. As I wrote, I noticed a group of musicians setting up nearby. They started playing soft, acoustic melodies that perfectly matched the mood of the evening. Their music filled the air, drawing a small crowd of people who clapped along to the rhythm. The combination of the music, the sunset, and the peaceful atmosphere made the moment feel almost magical. After finishing my journal entry, I decided to take a walk along the shoreline. The city lights began to sparkle in the distance, reflecting on the calm waters. I passed by a group of people sitting around a small bonfire, laughing and sharing stories. Their joy was contagious, and I couldn't help but smile as I walked by. Feeling a little hungry, I made my way to a small beachside cafe I had noticed earlier. The place was cozy, with tables set up facing the sea. I ordered a plate of seafood tapas and a refreshing glass of sangria. The food was delicious. Grilled prawns, calamari, and crispy fried anchovies paired perfectly with the sweet and fruity drink. As I ate, I thought about how wonderful the day had been. Barcelona had already exceeded all my expectations, and it was only my first full day here. I felt grateful for the experiences, the friendly people I had met, and the beauty of the city. When I finished my meal, the beach was quieter, with only a few people left enjoying the night. The stars were starting to appear in the sky, twinkling softly above the gentle waves. I took one last walk along the sand, breathing in the fresh sea air, before heading back to my apartment. Back in my room, I stood on the balcony for a few moments, looking out at the city lights. I knew that tomorrow would bring new adventures, but for now, I was content. Barceloneta Beach had given me a peaceful and unforgettable evening, one that I would always remember as part of my journey in Barcelona. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed and eager for another day of adventure in Barcelona. Today's plan was to visit Park Güell, one of the city's most iconic attractions. Known for its vibrant mosaics, imaginative architecture, and breathtaking views, it was a place I'd been dreaming of seeing for years. After a quick breakfast at a nearby cafe, a warm croissant and a cup of café con leche, I made my way to the park. The journey was scenic, with winding streets leading uphill. As I walked, I could see glimpses of the city below, gradually opening up to a panoramic view. When I arrived at Park Güell, I was greeted by the famous dragon statue, also known as El Drac. It was covered in colorful mosaics, each piece of tile shimmering under the morning sun. A small crowd had gathered around it, taking photos and admiring the intricate details. I snapped a picture as well, marveling at how something so whimsical could feel like a piece of art brought to life. Walking further into the park, I was surrounded by Antoni Gaudi's unique designs. The buildings, pathways, and sculptures looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. The curves and colors of the architecture blended perfectly with the natural surroundings, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. I followed the pathways, stopping to admire the famous Sala Hypostila, or hypostyle room. The ceiling was adorned with colorful mosaic medallions, each one telling its own story. The columns supporting the structure were massive yet elegant, making the space feel both grand and inviting. As I climbed higher into the park, the views became even more spectacular. Reaching the terrace of the Nature Square, I was rewarded with a sweeping view of Barcelona. From this vantage point, I could see the city stretching all the way to the sea, with the Sagrada Familia standing tall in the distance. I sat on one of the serpentine benches, which were covered in Gaudi's signature mosaic patterns. The bench curved in a way that felt surprisingly comfortable, and the colorful tiles seemed to sparkle under the sunlight. Around me, tourists and locals alike were taking in the view, chatting and laughing. While sitting there, I struck up a conversation with a fellow traveler. She was from Italy and visiting Barcelona for the first time, just like me. We exchanged stories about our trips and shared recommendations for places to visit. It was a simple but meaningful connection, reminding me of how travel brings people together. After exploring the park for a few hours, I stopped at a small kiosk inside to grab a bottle of water and a sandwich. I found a shady spot under a tree and enjoyed my lunch while listening to the birds chirping. The peacefulness of the park made it hard to leave, but I knew there was still more of Barcelona to discover. As I made my way towards the exit, I felt a sense of gratitude. Park Güell wasn't just a place of beauty. It was a reminder of how creativity and nature could come together to create something extraordinary. The day wasn't over yet, and I still had plans to visit a few more spots in the city before wrapping up my trip. But Park Güell had left an impression on me that I knew I would carry forever. As the sun began to set on my final day in Barcelona, I decided to spend the evening revisiting some of my favorite places. The city had given me so many unforgettable memories, and I wanted to soak in its beauty one last time. I started with a leisurely walk along La Rambla, where the energy of the street was as vibrant as ever. Street performers entertained the crowds, and the scent of food from nearby cafes filled the air. I stopped at a small stall to buy a souvenir, a small keychain shaped like the Sagrada Familia, a reminder of this beautiful city. From there, I wandered back to the Gothic quarter, where the narrow streets were now illuminated by soft golden lights. The atmosphere was magical, with the sound of distant music echoing through the alleys. I paused at Plaza Sant Felipe Neri, the peaceful square I had discovered earlier, and sat on a bench for a moment to reflect on my journey. As I walked towards Barceloneta Beach, the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange. The sea sparkled under the fading sunlight, and the gentle sound of the waves created a sense of calm. I found a quiet spot on the sand where I could watch the sun dip below the horizon. The city lights began to twinkle in the distance, and the stars slowly appeared above. Sitting there, I thought about everything I had experienced during my trip. From the lively streets of La Rambla to the serene beauty of Park Güell, every moment had been special. I had tasted delicious food, met wonderful people, and explored a city filled with history, culture, and charm. But this trip wasn't just about the places I had visited. It was also about growth. Traveling alone, I had pushed myself out of my comfort zone, practiced my English, and gained confidence in ways I never thought possible. As the evening grew cooler, I decided to head back to my apartment to pack. My suitcase, now filled with souvenirs and memories, was ready for the journey home. Standing on the balcony one last time, I looked out at the city lights and whispered, "Thank you, Barcelona." The next morning, I made my way to the airport. The streets were quieter at this hour, and the soft morning light gave the city a peaceful glow. At the airport, as I waited for my flight, I opened the leather journal I had bought and began to write my final thoughts. Barcelona taught me more than I expected. It reminded me to embrace the unknown, connect with others, and find beauty in the simplest moments. This city will always hold a special place in my heart, and I know I'll return someday. As my flight took off, I looked out of the window and watched the city shrink into the distance. It was hard to say goodbye, but I felt grateful for every moment I had spent there. And so, my journey came to an end, but the memories, lessons, and inspiration from Barcelona would stay with me forever.